Like Lord Monster says, you guys have really proven yourselves. I can't believe that you beat Bretson's trials. Well, this was the story Hainsworth and others involved told us about the threat coming to end this world. In the year 6352, 29 years ago, a mercenary captain slowly crept across the rooftop of a castle rookery. The sky was unsettling to him. Blue and black, tumultuous clouds swirled above. It had been this way since the man entered this hellish plane. Hainsworth had traveled far to make it to this point. The journey was dangerous and difficult, but he had nearly completed his task, and standing before him, he saw the object of his mission. A figure lied ahead, overlooking the landscape. The figure was surrounded by dozens of dead demons, some very large and likely quite powerful whilst still alive. The being was engulfed in a violently swirling pink haze, and the figure's hands were raised towards the horizon. This being was performing some kind of a ritual. Off far in the distance, Haines could see faraway castles, mountains, and enormous swaths of land collapsing into a black vortex and disappearing. Did this have something to do with the ritual of this strange being? Hainsworth wiggled his thick, mustachioed upper lip and thought to himself, "What have I gotten myself into here? Is all this worth it? Much rides on the word of a demon." The mercenary captain thought back to the visitor that led him to this accursed place. Months earlier, Hainsworth awoke with a start. His night was full of debauchery, women, drugs, drinking. He and his band of mercs celebrated another successful mission. As their success continued, their hunger for wealth and women, as well as drink and treasure, grew at a terrifying rate. Normally, he slept like the dead after a night like that. But a presence rattled him to his very core and startled him awake from his deep slumber. He looked ahead and saw a figure standing in the doorway. "Brother, show yourself," Haines hailed the intruder whilst deftly sliding his hand under his feather pillow, gripping his hidden rapier. The figure slowly entered the room. He wore a brown cloak with a hood that covered most of his face, but Hainsworth could still see it. This figure was a red-skinned demon with small black horns protruding from its forehead.
"Hello, young captain. I serve the demon lord, Damien. You can call me Armageddon."
"What do you want from me, creature?" asked Haines.
"I came here at the request of my master. We heard tale of a human in these lands that is impervious to mind control, illusions, mind reading, telepathy, any kind of mental powers. It is very important that we find him. Are you that man?"
asked the demon. Hainsworth wiggled his mustachioed upper lip and thought for a moment. "Why do you seek such a person?"
"I have a proposition for him. Damien, my master, desires a certain artifact that is possessed by another. I would ask this man to travel to a faraway place and to help us obtain this relic. If he does this, Damien would forever be in this man's debt. Riches and magic treasure beyond any mortal man has ever seen would be the reward for retrieving this very special item. We will make this man richer and more powerful than any king in this material plane."
"Brother, this man you seek, look no further for him. It is me."
"Will you accept this proposition and follow me to the artifact I spoke of?"
Hainsworth thought for a brief moment. He imagined gold coins raining from the sky, naked women piled high in a feather bed, and the high lords and kings of the world bowing down to his unmatched power. I accept. The demon before him smiled.
I will give you 1 month. You must assemble a formidable team of mortals to aid you in your task. The place you are traveling to swarms with demons and other horrors, many of which wouldn't be sympathetic with Damien's plan. Due to the nature of the foe we face, none of Damien's thralls know of this mission, aside from myself.
This seems unnecessarily difficult to me. Your master's men should be informed, so they let us pass unmolested. I'd hate to have to slay them before collecting my reward.
It must be this way. The current holder of the relic, he can passively read minds and detect hostile intent. If any near him are wary to our plot, the relic holder will instantly become privy to it. And he is much too strong to confront directly. He must be approached with stealth and subtlety. That is why we sought you out. Only you can retrieve this item for my lord.
Hainsworth smiled. I was raised in the abandon, brother. Sneakery and thievery are needed for survival there. That and cunning, strength, ruthlessness. I possess all these traits, my friend. Armageddon turned and walked towards the door.
1 month. Be ready.
How will I find you when I've finished gathering men?
You won't. I'll find you.
Haines grew nearer and nearer to the figure on the rooftop. He could see the pink pendant dangling on a necklace. Haines could make out the cube shape that Armageddon described. His thoughts turned to the men he left waiting several floors down from this location. Initially, he was going to venture here with a small group of picked men, but that elite team turned into dozens and dozens of greedy and ambitious mercenaries and bounty hunters looking for adventure and spoils. 3 particularly skilled bounty hunters stuck out in Hainsworth's mind. There was a gray-haired man, full of intelligence and analytical thought. He wielded a giant scythe and was a respected bounty hunter in his group. Another man had dark blue tattoos of stars on his cheeks and forehead. He wielded a gaudy jeweled saber and wore a yellow and black surcoat over his armor. This man was a competent bounty hunter and carried pouches of dust with him that he threw at his opponents in battle. This dust caused hallucinations and illusions to those that breathed it in. The last bounty hunter in the group was a muscular swordsman with flowing blonde hair and a bristly blonde beard with thick blonde sideburns. He was famous for defeating each bounty contract with a single blow from his sword. Hainsworth had hoped to recruit the best bounty hunter in the abandon, a man named Bjorn, but Hainsworth had been unable to find him in the 1 month that Haines had to prepare. Still, the force he brought to this place was significant. They had silently made their way to this ruined castle led by Armageddon, and only had to slay a small number of demons before arriving at their destination. Hainsworth crept closer and closer to his prey, keeping one hand on the rapier on his sword belt. The pink haze surrounding the form in front of him was swirling and wavering like some kind of powerful aura. He could see an abnormally shaped, bulbous whitish head. The figure's face was not present. It had humanoid eyes, but no nose and no mouth. The creature wore unusually heavy clothes for this place, flowing purple robes with an unnecessary amount of fabric. How could it be that cold with only this slight chill? Hainsworth wondered. Haines was crouched low and slowly edged forward. The creature should be aware of his presence by this point, but it was just as Armageddon said it would be. The being was focused on its ritual and was complacent. Why worry about oncoming threats when you could passively read the minds of anyone near you? The being did not sense Haines's approach. The mercenary captain reached towards the pendant, dangling from the creature's necklace. His fingers stretched out, and his grasp grew inches closer and closer to the dangling pendant. Perspiration dripped down Haynes' mustache, and he sweated from the tense situation. One slip and this thing would surely kill him. With finesse and deftness, Hainsworth's fingertips grabbed onto the pendant. He dislodged and plucked it from the setting on the figure's necklace. Almost at once, the creature's pink haze aura dissipated and the being dropped both arms to its sides. It stared at Hainsworth and made an indiscernible facial expression. It appeared to the mercenary that the creature was trying to speak, to communicate with him somehow, yet it had no mouth. Suddenly, the being's head snapped back, and it stepped away from the mortal that stole its pendant, flailing its arms in the air. A pink aura engulfed the creature, much more solid and violent than the hazy aura from earlier. The castle beneath Hainsworth's feet began to shake. Even the air and the sky appeared to be shaking. The aura surrounding this being grew larger and larger. Then, pink missiles of energy appeared to fire off from within the aura in all directions. Some fired off into the sky and towards the horizon and seemed to ripple through space and disappear, while others careened downwards and smashed through the stones and castle walls beneath them. Hainsworth was nervous and fearful when he crept up and stole the pendant. But this feeling of fear that he experienced now was greater than anything he had ever felt in his life. Haynes turned back towards the rookery stair and bolted back towards his men. He descended back down to where they awaited and greeted them. "Brothers! Come on, let's go! I've got it!" Armageddon and each mercenary were holding their ears and wincing, cradling their heads. The gray-haired bounty hunter asked him, "Captain, how can you bear that horrible screaming? I feel as though it's piercing right into my skull." Puzzled, Hainsworth gave a command to his companions. "I hear nothing, my friends. Let's move out." The men raced through the castle as the walls shook and large chunks of stone dislodged from the ceiling, smashing through the floor all around them. The doors in this building were rather narrow, and it took time for the sizable band of men to navigate through them. Too much time. Abruptly, the men in front stopped running and looked around in confusion. "Brothers, hurry! We must make it back to the abandon before we are pursued," Hainsworth said. But then he realized the shaking had ceased.
"Captain."
The bounty hunter with thick blonde hair addressed Haynes.
The loud screaming stopped.
Hainsworth was puzzled once again. He had heard no screams. Before he could respond to his subordinate, Armageddon let out a pained shriek and roughly grabbed at his own head.
Get out of here! Too slow! Bring to Damien! Hurry!
Armageddon managed a few pained words and then fell to the ground, writhing in agony. A slight pink haze surrounded his head as he grasped and clawed at himself. Blood flowed as he sliced at his cranium with razor-sharp demonic claws. Hainsworth and the bounty hunter with the star tattoos on his face bent down to scoop up their guide, but the pink mist around his head enveloped his whole body, turning more solid, then violently pulsed in an energetic pink wave. The tattooed bounty hunter, realizing they needed this demon to escape back to their plane, roughly shook Armageddon.
"What's wrong? Gotta go. We need you. Get up!
The pink aura surged and a jolt of pink energy flashed, knocking Hainsworth and the bounty hunter a few feet away from Armageddon. The demon stopped writhing, falling completely still. Then it sat up and looked at Hainsworth and his men for a moment with a blank stare, before slowly standing up. A solid pink aura still surrounded him, but slowly it dissipated. The swordsman bounty hunter with bristly blonde hair approached Armageddon and put his hand on the demon's shoulder.
You alright, bud?
"No, you fool! Get away from him!" exclaimed the old man. In a flash, Armageddon grabbed the back of the blonde man's head and delivered a brutal knee strike to his gut. Wheezed the swordsman as the wind was knocked from his lungs. Holding the swordsman's head, Armageddon wound up the same arm and turned his hips, hurling the man through the air, sending him crashing through a wooden table. Splinters of wood and debris exploded upwards from the impact. Armageddon turned his gaze onto Haines. The sound of dozens of blades unsheathing in unison echoed through the drafty room. The old man bared down on the demon from the left with his giant scythe, while the saber-wielding tattooed man came from the right. Armageddon drew a large, jagged scimitar from his cloak and easily parried the scythe, sending the old man stumbling backwards. Then turned and delivered a backhanded fist to the saber-wielder's face. The man fell backwards and rolled several times on the dusty floor from the impact of the blow. Without missing a beat, as he stopped rolling, the tattooed man got to one knee with the momentum of his fall and produced a small leather pouch in his hand. He untied the pouch and emptied some of the multicolored powder into his palm. Then, the man stood and jerked his body towards his enemy, blowing on the dust. The fine powder jettisoned through the air, and a cloud of the dust covered Armageddon. Armageddon ignited in burning red flames. He looked down at his hands and formed glowing balls of flaming red energy in each of them. The demon stepped towards the tattooed man and reeled back to launch one of the fire orbs in his direction, when a rapier suddenly delivered 5 lightning-quick jabs into the demon's side and back. Bellowed Armageddon. The creature turned and saw Hainsworth, his offhand behind his back, while his sword hand was holding a rapier towards his opponent. Hainsworth wiggled his mustachioed upper lip and quipped, "I would have killed you eventually anyway, you nasty, disgusting creature." Armageddon's flaming aura intensified and his eyes lit aflame. He took a step towards Hainsworth. Suddenly, the old man's huge scythe flew through the air on the end of a chain and sunk into the demon's back. Armageddon fell to one knee and the tattooed man slashed at his side as the old man yanked on his chain, withdrawing the scythe from Armageddon's back and returning it to himself. The demon turned and hurled one of its fire orbs in the tattooed man's direction. The man easily dodged out of the way, and the orb slammed into a wall at the far side of the room. Flames erupted from the impact, and the walls and furniture began to ignite. Hainsworth's rapier delivered 3 more precise stabs into Armageddon's ribs on the opposite side of him. The creature toppled over, cradling his many wounds. The gray-haired bounty hunter stepped forward and raised his scythe high into the air, ready to deliver the fatal blow. The other men in the room let out a gasp, and the sound of slow, Light footsteps emanated from the direction that they all entered into this room. A figure appeared with a large, bulbous head. The figure's face was not present. It had humanoid eyes, but no nose and no mouth. It was the being from the rooftop. The creature pointed at Hainsworth and telepathically demanded of him and all humans present,
"The pendant. Return it to me, or you all die."
Everyone in the room was quiet for a moment. The gray-haired man exasperatedly asked his captain, "Well, are you going to do it?" "Do what?" asked Hainsworth. Confused, the old man said, "That thing says if you give the pendant back, it'll let us go." Hainsworth was quite confused. He had heard no words from the creature. The being slowly, deliberately, placed a few fingers on its own head. Suddenly, the gray-haired man started screaming, clutching his cranium. A pink haze covered the bounty hunter's skull, and he fell, writhing onto the ground. His eyes went wild, and the poor gray-haired man clearly could not endure the tremendous pain he was in. Hainsworth and the others were horrified at the scene, frozen in fear. The blonde-headed swordsman bounty hunter struck the bulbous-headed figure from behind with his blade. The blow had no effect at all, but the pink haze around the old man dissipated. The gray-haired old man still rolled on the ground. The poor wretch immediately began muttering nonsense and cackling like a lunatic, clearly in excruciating misery. The creature turned to the swordsman and said telepathically,
"You will know eternal torment for striking me, foolish mortal."
Hainsworth and his men turned and rushed out of the room, trying to escape while their opponent was distracted. A demonic red hand grabbed the swordsman's shoulder from behind and hurled him into an adjacent room. The blonde man fell and he skidded along the floor, but was immediately back on his feet, sword in hand.
"Come, beast, I'll caress you with my steel,"
exclaimed the yellow-haired bounty hunter. Armageddon rushed towards him. Dozens of Hainsworth's men piled up in front of the narrow room exit, desperately trying to escape, as the clanging of sword and scimitar rang out. The being slowly walked towards the band of mercenaries and bounty hunters, and as he did so, he had two fingers pressed deliberately to the side of his head. Bits of brain and fragments of skull rained on the men as some in the back row crumpled onto the floor dead. Their heads bursted open, one at a time before they fell. Hainsworth's men began to scream in absolute terror.
Oh my God! Get the fuck out of here!
You gotta get the fuck out of here.
Oh my god.
Run!
Get the fuck out of here.
The being continued to slowly walk towards the group of fleeing men, taking slow, deliberate steps. A split second, pink haze surrounded each man's head. The instant before, craniums blew apart and splattered the walls and ceilings with gore. Hainsworth and the man with star tattoos on his face ran, carrying the old man out the front gates of the castle, flanked by his mercenaries that survived the massacre inside. They ran as fast as they could, away from the castle and the being pursuing them.